Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Before we get into our second segment, perhaps my favorite segment of the day, as I am a Texas fan, I do want to remind you guys yet again to like, follow, and subscribe to the show. And also, if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving a tip or donation for now at the link GSMC.cloud. It's a huge support to both of me and my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. Things will change as we get live, but for now, GSMC.cloud is the way to go. But without further ado, let's jump right into one of my favorite segments of the day. We are going to be talking about another SEC newcomer, Oklahoma's rivals, my guys, the Texas Longhorns. Last year truly was a fantastic year for the Texas Longhorns and for the Texas Longhorns faithful. It really showed what Steve Sarkisian is building in terms of culture there. It really showed the maturity of Quinn Ewers to take the next step in his career and develop as a player. And most importantly, it set the foundation for new up-and-coming players within the Texas program to follow the lead of some of those elder statesmen in the squad. And I'm really excited and intrigued to see what this year looks like for Texas football as they enter a new horizon in the SEC. Now, I do want to kind of look at two different things here in terms of their win projections and totals. Projected wins, according to PFF, they're only sitting at 8.9, but in terms of FanDuel's, they're at 10.5, which sits right around where a lot of people will expect them to be. And in terms of over-under, I think I'm willing to take the over in terms of 8.9, but they're going to be sitting right around 10 wins, I believe, if that, at the end of the season. And the reason why people are higher on Texas than you might think, after all that turnover last year, losing Jatavion Sanders, losing Xavier Worthy, losing A.D. Mitchell, losing almost every single one of their stalwart pass catchers from last season, adding Isaiah Bond, adding Matthew Golden and Silas Bolden, adding Amari Nyblack. All of these players really fit the mold of what Texas was last year because they all had similar traits to what each and every one of those former Texas players brought to the plate. You have Isaiah Bond, perhaps going to be the go-to target, but more of a vertical threat. You have Matthew Golden and Bolden, stalwart route runners, fantastic hands on each of them. Amari Nyblack always gets the job done. Could improve in terms of pass blocking, in my humble opinion, but it's going to be a solid Texas Longhorn. And so I look at this offense, and I think, well, there were certainly a lot of things that I definitely thought last year's iteration of the Texas Longhorns will do better than this year's. For example, I think they had a lot more verbiage last year, and this year, Steve Sarkisian is going to have to tinker a little bit, figure out who fits with what particular play setup, and who receives the ball at a certain time, who gets the lion's share of the targets, and things of that nature. But at this moment in time, I look at the receivers and the O-line, especially the Texas Longhorns, who returned Kelvin Banks, Jake Majors as a stalwart on this line. They returned so much production in this offense that I can't say that they will lose a step just because all of these guys came through the transfer portal. Steve Sarkisian will find a way. He's creating something here. And as long as the transfers believe in that, then Texas can also move forward and also think ahead to the future. Because that's ultimately what they were also thinking about here. They're trying to set a foundation right now where, Quinn Ewers can become the best he can possibly be because he was a 5-star recruit, and then transition it to Arch Manning when it's his time in the SEC. Then I look at their defense, right? The defense last year was very weak. That was their weakest point. And we saw it in that Sugar Bowl loss in the CFP semifinal. They also added to the portal. Andrew Makuba comes in at safety, an experienced safety out of Clemson. Malik Muhammad, a young guy, really looking to improve there. So if they can add that experience and that youth together and figure out a formula there, those guys can be the X factors of the secondary and really help that pass defense get bolstered. You added production up front. That's where I think the strength will remain for them, even though you lose both Sweat and Murphy. You have Vernon Broughton up front. I really like him. Alfred Collins is finally going to get a chance to shine. And then you add in UTSA transfer Trey Moore. I'm excited to see how he fits into the scheme. So overall, the profile of Texas, while it certainly looks very dissimilar to last year because of the production you've lost, Steve Sarkisian did a fantastic job diagnosing what he needed to improve and finding apt replacements for guys that might not be similar players to what he had last year, but still fit the mold of what he wants out of his offense. And now that we are in their schedule, let's talk about that. They really got off the hook this year. They don't face any of Alabama, Tennessee, Missouri, Ole Miss, or LSU. And those are all teams, maybe outside of Tennessee because I don't know if they're ready just yet, that are expected to be in the CFP conversation. By avoiding them, Texas can, really focus on something that I think troubled them last year. Focusing on quote-unquote unimportant games. Because that's what always tripped up Texas. They always seem to play down to their opposition. They always seem to kind of get lost within the game. And we saw it last year when they almost blew the lead against Kansas State, almost blew the lead against TCU, where they just did not have their heads in it for the entirety of the game. This year, now that they avoid all these teams, I think they can really focus on the matchups that they want. And when they get to the big games, where in week 2 they immediately out of the gate have Michigan, a revamped Michigan at that, and then Georgia at home later in the year, they can really focus on those games. But like I said, they also have to focus on the tricky games, the ones that might sneak up on you. Kentucky, they're a weird team. They always have a potent defense. Mark Stoops is a fantastic coach over there. And there's going to be an improved Florida. I think that Billy Napier is going to start building up. I really like Graham Mertz in that situation, so let's see what they do. But right now, the focus for Texas is A, making sure that everyone is aligned with the philosophy, not just, the guys that have been with this program for a while, have gotten to know Steve Sarkisian, but the transfers as well, because they're the important ones. They're at the X Factor positions right now. The Isaiah Bond can't be bad. Matthew Golden and Silas Bolden can't be bad. Makuba can't be bad. Trey Moore cannot be bad. Because if they're bad, that sullies and muddies the culture of what Steve Sarkisian is building here. And so a lot of pressure is on them, but if they rise to that occasion, then Texas shouldn't have to worry about being in close games with teams they should be blowing out, so to speak. And I look at the 2 games on their schedule that stand out. Michigan week 2, Georgia later in the year, at home. Those, if you really think about it, aren't necessarily the trickiest of games, but the reason why I can't see them going better than 10-2 is because both of those teams feel like they can exploit Texas in different ways. Michigan, let's look at them first. Whoever emerges QB, and I believe it will be Alex Orji at the position, is going to be in a system that has been hammered home at Michigan for as long as Jim Harbaugh is there, and Sharon Moore understands that. He understands that he can't necessarily drift away from the philosophy set forth by Jim Harbaugh. So they are going to be a very physical team. And while you might believe that that suits Texas, that teams that are predicated on smash-mouth football, we're going to have to go up against that front, because last year they were one of the best run defenses in the entirety of college football. I don't necessarily think that this year's iteration is yet comfortable enough to understand the team that's been doing this for quite some time. This is, like a Kansas State where they try to mix it up depending on the week. No. This is Michigan Wolverines, a team that went undefeated last year, playing the style of football. And no matter who's at quarterback, I think that the Michigan Wolverines will always live and die by the sword that is passed to them by Jim Harbaugh. And then when you look at Georgia, this is the game where Texas could face a lot of troubles in their pass defense if Makuba does not live up to expectations, if Muhammad does not live up to expectations in that secondary. Because Georgia is a very timing-based team. Carson Beck, if he has the time, can carve you apart at every level of the field. That's how confident Georgia is in his abilities, and that's how confident they are in being able to parse through whatever defensive game plan you have set up. So those two games are the reason why I'm going to have to take the under here in terms of the FanDuel projections, in terms of 10.5 wins. Because as much as I would love to say that Texas can compete in those games, I'm not saying that they won't. They definitely can. Those are two teams that can really get on Texas' nerves a little bit here. These are two teams that worry them in different ways. Because Texas is all about their own tempo, their own flow, their own ways of playing the game, setting the bar for themselves. If that bar isn't set, let's say if Michigan has very long possessions, let's say if Georgia also has long possessions, methodically moving down the football field, that kind of messes with them. That kind of messes with you. It sticks with you. So the thing with Texas is, focus on winning the game that you should win, especially those against teams that could sneak up on you. But also, try to understand the intricacies of teams that have been developing their systems for many years to come. Because that's what the SEC is. These are well-oiled machines. Some teams have had a lot of turnover. Alabama might have a lot of turnover. LSU is breaking in a new QB. Missouri hasn't yet hit the horizon where they truly are going to be a contender. They're right now just in the precipice. Ole Miss as well, a little bit. So Texas needs to understand that this ride in the SEC is going to be a weird one. Because they're not always going to have their way, and they're not always going to be a team that is predicated on tempo. They're going to have to find ways to really amplify their offense to make it more dynamic than just tempo. And that's all down to the philosophy set forth by Steve Sarkisian. If he can get that right, then Texas will be a real threat every year that they're in the SEC. But if not, then who knows what teams will take advantage of that. But that will just about do it for the Texas Longhorns win projections. Coming next, we transition to the ACC and a team very much in flux after a season where their hopes were dashed in very heartbreaking fashion. We'll be right back to talk about them after the break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without